Hi, my name is Stanislav Costiuc and I'm a professional game designer with 11 years of experience in the industry. We'll continue ranking all games that feature Spider-Man as the main or one of the main protagonists with the help of my Stasocritic system, details in the pinned comment. The early 90s have started changing the situation with Spider-Man video games to the better. I wouldn't say they have seen an unapologetically good Spider-Man game yet, but still there was more actually engaging gameplay. And then 1994 saw the premiere of what's probably one of the more iconic Spider-Man animated shows, which would push the character into additional layers of popularity. Naturally, you would think that the video gaming world would attempt to take advantage of that, right? So let's see how Spider-Man video games fare in this era of the 90s animated show. In 1993, Spider-Man comics saw a huge event of questionable quality called Maximum Carnage. Essentially a massive romp between a team of superheroes gathered by Spider-Man and Venom against a team of supervillains formed by Carnage. Whatever one might think of this event now, at the time it was a pop culture phenomenon, and the game based on that phenomenon was a pretty big deal. It was released in 1994 and developed by Software Creations, who were not newcomers to the Spider-Man gaming world. The game tried to be a very faithful adaptation. Locations from the comics were recreated as levels, actual comic panels and some of the dialogues are used in cutscenes to retell the story, and it's the first time you could also play as Venom, with some gameplay differences to boot. The symbiote is stronger than Spider-Man, but slower. Outside of the tame aspect, this is surprisingly a very decent beat-em-up. By this point in time, one might be used to Spider-Man games having clunky controls at best, but they're actually polished here. Hit detection never raises any questions, there is a variety of moves and combos. Maximum Carnage is a very enjoyable brawler at a core basic level. The only core gameplay complaint I have is that there's too many actions assigned to the web button, so it is somewhat finicky for it to always do what you want it to do. Maximum Carnage, though, is not an easy game. I've had so many runs and yet reached 2/3 of the campaign at most, the authentic way that is, without save states. By the end, it transforms into a boss rush galore, and those can hit pretty hard. However, with each replay you get a better understanding of the game, how to crowd control nukes better, more efficient tactics for conserving health or beating some of the bosses, in which nooks and crannies you can find extra lives and continues. There are also secret rooms that can really help you out with additional resources, but accessing them is so arbitrary that it is impossible to find any without a guide. And yet, these secret rooms are imperative for making the trek through the entire game. There is a certain sense of satisfaction in learning more every time you start the game, including how things like choosing between Spider-Man and Venom at certain points not only affects what levels you have and story beats you see, but also what power-ups you can actually find. You also learn when it's best to use the limited number of hero assists, as every sidekick you call for has a different ability and you need to find the most efficient use for each. It is said then that for a game focused so much on replayability, the enemy variety is abysmally small. Quite frankly, it does get tiring to fight the same mooks after a while, even if some of them are pretty funny, like the old people with umbrellas who are surprisingly tough. But what the game lacks in enemy variety, it tries to balance out with level variety, and I appreciate how Maximum Carnage actually tries to put you in the shoes of Spider-Man by showing through gameplay the need to form a superhero team that would help you fight against these overwhelming odds. Elements like Hero Assist are introduced in a narrative through gameplay, by putting you into a fight that you might win if you're skilled enough, but are most likely going to lose the first time you play, and yet a superhero comes in to save you. And it's cool because this type of thing sadly can't be called a standard even nowadays, let alone back then. That said, don't expect to understand much in terms of story except the general beats. While the game faithfully recreates a lot of comic panels, it is also missing quite a bit, so a pretty big number of transitions feels very abrupt. Still, even though there are plenty of ways in which Maximum Carnage could improve, it is the first Spider-Man game that I can unapologetically call good. I wouldn't even mind getting back to it later to try and actually reach the ending and not just watch it on YouTube. As such, it gets an appropriate Statocritic rating of 70. Talking about disappointing 90s Spider-Man games feels like being stuck in a Groundhog Day loop. There's only so much one can say about clunky, uncomfortable controls and poor level design, though what's unique to this title is the interesting concept but poor implementation of a level layering system. You have to mess around with jumps of different heights to switch between layers. And while this game is based on the Spider-Man animated series, the rendition of the awesome theme song is a disappointing, short, repetitive loop. A similar statement can be applied to the entire game, hence the Statocritic score of 31. The Genesis version of the animated series game has the same premise, but quite a big difference in gameplay and graphics, though sadly none of which are an improvement over the SNES version. In fact, it has even more problems like inconsistent collision that makes it even more annoying to play, so the game gets a Statocritic rating of 25. Again, by and large, there is nothing here we haven't discussed in relation to a bunch of previous bad Spider-Man games already. Separation Anxiety is, one could say, the inevitable sequel to Maximum Carnage. However, the public reception to this game was that of disappointment, as it was considered a reskin of Maximum Carnage with an added co-op mode. But I will say this, if this were a reskin of Maximum Carnage, at least we would have a game that's fun to play. But for one reason or another, the mechanics in Separation Anxiety do not work the same way. Everything is more delayed, hit detection is worse, combos are not as snappy, level design is less varied, and as a result it is not nearly as engaging as the original. Like its predecessor, the story is also based on a comic book plot arc, but this time it is retold through text paragraphs that are not only visual and appealing, but also fail to actually properly explain the story anyway. Separation Anxiety gets a Statocritic rating of 35. Despite its issues, the game is more playable than many other Spider-Man titles, so if you're a really huge fan of Maximum Carnage, you might find some enjoyment here as well. And co-op always makes even disappointing games more interesting, so there is that, I guess. But personally, I would rather have another go at the Maximum Carnage campaign instead. I had high hopes for this Japan-only Spider-Man exclusive because it looks amazing. But sadly, that's everything amazing about it. Once again, it has the typical package of unwieldy controls and disappointing level design, but also in addition to that, an extremely stingy timer where you have a minute and a half on average to complete every level. And if there is a boss at the end of it, well, the timer doesn't restart, you have to do so in the time that's left. It gets a Statocritic rating of 35. There is potential there, but ultimately it's disappointing with nothing striking to discuss. This is probably one of the most obscure Spider-Man games out there. Developed by Brooklyn Multimedia, it's a point-and-click adventure game with action minigames that was released for DOS and Windows 3.1. It's a pain to get it working on modern PCs and equally painful to properly record it. And I'm not sure if it's worth the trouble, because the game is more interesting in concept than it is in practice. I do really appreciate it for trying to focus on the double life aspect of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, not just in narrative but in gameplay as well, with players actually having to make choices that influence the story. This is not something even modern Spider-Man games tend to tackle, but just having simple choices like following the police to an active crime scene or staying to make sure everything will remain okay on your wife's film set really elevates the immersion into the character. The story is actually enjoyable, having a couple of nice twists and turns. Sadly, from a gameplay perspective, the title is woefully average, and action minigames are far more difficult than they should be because the cursor sensitivity is horrible. The game is not even a looker. Sure, on a technical level, the rotoscoped animations are impressive, but when everything is put together, it feels very stylistically inconsistent. Spider-Man: The Sinister Six gets a Statocritic rating of 51. While conceptually interesting, its implementation leaves much to be desired, though to be fair, it is far from a bad attempt and certainly much more enjoyable than a bunch of other lower quality Spider-Man games that have been released up to this point. Speaking of lower quality Spider-Man games, look, every time I discuss one it feels like I'm going over the same shit over and over again. The only new thing I can say about Web of Fire is that not only the game itself is a failure, the platform it was released on is a failure as well. It's harsh, I know, but let's just assign the Statocritic score of 28, because by this point I don't have the patience to discuss another bad Spider-Man platformer that shares the same issues as multiple other bad Spider-Man platformers. The middle of the 90s finally saw one legitimately good Spider-Man game. The rest of this era has brought is middling at best, but usually disappointing or bad. Honestly, it is no wonder that after 1996 we wouldn't see a single Spider-Man video game until the year 2000. Of course, Marvel's bankruptcy filing could be a factor, but that didn't prevent other Marvel-based properties to be released in the latter half of the 90s, just not Spider-Man. Web of Fire was a massive failure in part thanks to Sega 32X discontinuation, but it's not a good game anyway. The Sinister Six also obviously didn't sell much, Separation Anxiety was a disappointing sequel, TV show tie-ins were far from great. And look, in the context of my scoring system, only games below 30 are different shades of bad, everything above has some redeeming points for a potentially engaged audience, even if not a big one. But there's so much good faith said audience can put into a license that doesn't deliver with some degree of consistency. So, in the next video, we'll take a look at the resurgence of Spider-Man games in the 2000s and what they have brought to keep the video game license thriving.